All right, welcome everybody to the Sparks podcast, where we discuss what sparks inspiration, creativity, insight, and meaning in life. Once again, I'm your host, Nick Ross, and in today's episode, I'm joined by author and educator Roger Allan Clark, where we discuss his most recent book, The Summer of the Ennead. The book blends elements of ancient philosophy, spirituality, and the natural environment, and is about what might happen in a world where all life is valued, where caring for Mother Earth outweighs giving in to greed and selfishness, and where working together makes us stronger than working apart. Ultimately, it's a story of love, kindness, and hope. Roger has a bachelor's and master's in history and a master's and doctoral degree in education. He has 35 years of teaching middle school, high school, university students, as well as adult education, including 5 years of teaching in China. We also have an interesting connection as he taught my dad in elementary school, which is where the conversation starts off. And Roger and I have an enriching conversation discussing the creative process for his book, as well as his experiences as a taxi driver, a teacher, traveling to China, and how taking on the role of the observer has greatly impacted his life. Be sure to check out the links in the description to check out more on Roger and his writing. And I will give a bit of a heads up that we had some technical difficulties during the conversation, which led to a bit of audio issues. But regardless, I think it still turned out great, and it was a pleasure to talk with him. So once again, thank you for watching and listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. You're actually an old teacher of my dad's.
Yep.
He told me a story. I think the first time I heard about you was he told me a story about when he was in the 8th grade, and a teacher of his had walked him through this exercise that stuck with him for a long time. And it was a mindfulness exercise where you tighten your feet and then you
Mm.
release, and then you tighten
Yeah,
your legs and let
yeah,
go,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
then all the way up. And that stuck with him as a memory of a significant thing.
We must have done that in the gym with the whole class.
Mm,
That's something I learned at prenatal class
mm,
for my first son, who was born in 1974. I I met your dad in about 77, I think,
okay.
or 76. I think he left the school in 78,
Mm,
and he and I were there. I was thinking of another story today. Um, we were we both like baseball a lot, so we would go out in the there's a small diamond behind the school. Have you ever seen that school?
no, no, I don't think so.
There's a small diamond there, and it's very small, like a typical one of those practice diamonds that little kids play. And we would do slow pitches to each other and try to hit the ball up on the roof of the school.
Right.
And then sometimes we were lucky we could hit it far enough that it would actually go over. It was a flat roof, right? So we'd go over the roof and roll off into the other. I don't know how many balls we left up there, but that was one of our summertime activity, or like June. You do it in June or May. I remember that. Your dad was a good athlete and a very good guy. So
Yeah, he speaks very highly of you, and he was the
yeah.
one who actually recommended that I maybe ask you to sit down and talk with me, because we had been talking about you, and I started this podcast, and I think he kind of
Mm.
mentioned it and put a feeler out, and then he told me about your book, and
Ah,
so that intrigued me. The title alone, which I do have here, right, the Summer of the
right.
Ennead, is it?
Ennead.
Yeah. So I did end
I'll
up
tell
getting
you
it.
about that in a little while when
Yeah,
you
yeah,
want.
for sure. But that's kind of how we came to be. So I'm interested with your teaching. You taught for 35 years.
Uh, I taught for 30 years for the Waterloo County Board,
Hmm.
and then I did about five roughly in China.
Right. Okay. Right.
And
Right.
then
Yeah.
and I also did 5 years of taxi driving in between Waterloo and China. So
Hmm.
I think my taxi driving was the most enjoyable
Was it
job.
really? Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was a very cool job. Sometimes it wasn't fun, but you met a lot of people and you see things. I began to notice patterns, and I remember telling a guy and his mom. I picked him up at the Conestoga Mall, and I said, I told them about this, that I sometimes don't see somebody for a month, and then suddenly I see them for 2 days in a row. There's no explaining that.
Hmm.
And so I took them home to their home And the next day, I get a call to the Waterloo Square, and I was driving an old Mercedes, so everybody knew what my car was. And I pulled up, and there's this big smiley face guy standing there, and it was the same guy from the day before who had, in the meantime, moved down to Kitchener and got a new place to live, but didn't know anything about shopping down there. So he came up to Waterloo Square to get his
Wow.
groceries, and I picked him up.
Wow.
So it's like you were talking about, you mentioned something about one of the quotes about things in the past.
Hmm.
We're talking because 40 years ago, I taught your dad.
Right, right,
That's the
yeah.
reason it happened.
Right, yeah, that was one of the quotes, yeah, from the book that I was going to bring up about this idea of the remembered and unremembered past, right? And you never know how these things kind of weave together and you end up crossing paths in some weird way in the distant future. And
Exactly.
yeah, it's so interesting. So I'm wondering about actually if you might start with that little story that I read on your website about the observation when you became the observer when you were very, very young.
Ah, yeah. I was 3 years old, and I contracted a kidney disease.
Hmm.
And at the time, I've done a little research. At the time, nobody survived that. No
Hmm.
children survived. And they put me in the hospital, several hospitals, but my parents weren't allowed to visit. So I think that it, that kind of made me. That was how I learned what was going on. I watched the nurses and and whatever I could watch. Um, and I remember I have certain images of people standing in the doorway, not my parents, but doctors or. Um, and my grandmother said to me when I came home, she said it scared her because she thought I was looking right through her.
Hmm.
And I think what it was, I was trying to absorb, because one of the things that happens with that is that you no longer trust. Um, and that's been an issue for me all my life,
Hmm.
the trust, because I didn't understand why my parents didn't see me. I didn't think they didn't want me. I just didn't know what the hell was going on. I was just there. And my mom apparently used to come stand in the hall and watch me through the door.
Hmm.
So um, I think that affected me a great deal. And that's probably one of my strengths in life
Hmm.
is I observe things. I was telling somebody the other day, one day, my son Tim and I were watching one of those, I think Sharon Stone movies from back in the 90s, sexy woman. And there was this bad guy chasing her in a car. And in the early part, and then he was just be there and not there. And then near the end, she was walking and this car came over toward her. And Tim said, "Oh, that must be him." I said, "No, it's a different license plate." Because I had remembered the license plate from like an hour before.
Hmm.
So it's just those are just habits that I have that
Right,
I
right.
and I have a good sense of direction and a good memory. So all of those things work together. I mean, I haven't always been a good student. I mean, I wasn't very hardworking in high school or my first degree, but I don't think I ever lost that. I mean, that's a skill.
Right,
And
okay,
part of it
interesting.
is the fact, I mean, the other thing is, and I believe this strongly,
Hmm.
we are born with predispositions towards certain things. So this idea that everything is about behavioralism and nurture rather than nature, I don't believe that. I think nature has a much bigger role. And so it's quite possible that I had a predisposition to be an observant
Hmm.
person. And then my disease, my sickness, just made that, amplified that. And
Hmm.
that became, and then I practiced, and I'm 3 years old.
Right.
The other thing is, I remember reading that if you haven't really done a good job of raising your kids before the age of 4, it's over because they've been watching you for 4 years, picking up on everything you do, knowing all your mistakes, copying them because that's what they do.
Hmm.
I mean, children are wonderful observers. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's how they learn. And I suppose that's like a small animal has to be very observant, watching mom and dad, how to hunt. And I think the same with human beings, but we parents just think, well, we're so smart. We teach them everything.
Right.
They learn everything until they can talk.
Right. I see.
They're observers. They don't really communicate. They're watching and they are learning, and it's amazing what they can learn by the age of 4. They're pretty well set in the kind of person they're going to be. It will be damaged or it will be enhanced depending on life experiences. But well, I think my hospitalization was a trauma, and it's a trauma that affects you in your life. I presume almost everybody has one. I know my dad was being 6 years old and having a little sister be born, taking all the attention away from him. And even at 93, he was still complaining about that problem.
Right.
He could never get rid of that.
Right.
It just
it's so formative.
It wasn't enough.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. No, it's so interesting talking to you, because there's so many little areas to dive down in and zoom in on. So, but I want to get to your book as well. And I think that'll spur off a lot of other things that will tie in all of what we've said already. So I'm curious about the title itself, The Summer of the Ennead. Where did that idea first come to you? Because the idea is like the Spark podcast, right? The inspiration.
Well, I've been doing, thank you for sending these questions, because I started digging around, and I have this book that's got everything in it. It's even got the Ennead there. Well, I want to just tell you about, I mispronounced that word for a long time. And if you go on to ask how to pronounce, you get all kinds of.
Right.
I was talking to a friend of mine, a Greek guy who lives down in Vermont, and I told him about, and I held the book up for him, and he said, Ennead.
Right. Okay.
Just like the Ennead, the famous story about the founding of Rome. The Ennead, Romulus and no, I'm not sure if it's Romulus, but it's pronounced the same way, Ennead.
How did that start for you, for the idea?
Okay, well, first of all, I wanted to write a story. I had an idea of a children's story, and I was looking at my old notes today, and I realized this was pre-2010, because I said, I don't have any grandchildren. I didn't. So it might 2008. I remember sharing it with a friend, and she thought it was kind of cool. So it's got to be prior to my eldest granddaughter's birth in 2010. And I was just thinking about a story of some kids, just kids, maybe special kids. I thought initially I liked Aurora's children. I was going to call it Aurora's children. She's the goddess of the sunrise, I think, Roman. And I just thought, that's a cool name. I like Aurora. Forget the town, but I'm thinking.
Right.
So that was sort of where it sat for a while. Then I've got 2 grandchildren. And then I'm thinking more about it, and I'm looking at trying to involve grandchildren in my family, children in my family. And because my sister was the earliest, the first to get married, so her son is about almost 60 now, and so his children are way too old. So I looked at the grandchildren from me, from my brother, and from me, I guess, just my brother and I. And he has a son and daughter. The daughter has 4, son has 2. My 2 boys have 3 between them. So it kind of popped into my head. And then I was looking. I'm very interested in numerology over the years. So I was looking at that. And then I discovered, I thought there's 9, because that was a nice package, all the same generation. And I did some further research, I guess. And then I discovered this word Ennead, which I'd never seen before. And I discovered that it means 9. And Ennea, without the D, Ennea is 9 in Greek. And Ennead is a group of 9. And it really got started with the Egyptians in their religion. There were 9 gods who
Mm.
worked together. Um, but I just liked the number, and I liked the number 3, and so 3 threes and so on and so forth.
Right, right.
I go into and in the story, then I learned later when when we were kind of having these meetings at the campground, that there were then 3 other people. And I thought, is that going to cause me trouble? So I looked it up. It turns out 12 is the number of perfection. So
Mm.
9 is a special number of power. 12 is a number of perfection. And serendipitously, the number became very important. And I didn't realize this until I had written the first section of the book, the first 9 days. And then I was stuck and I didn't know what to do, because I wanted these kids to go out and to meet their guides and to learn, but I couldn't see doing that on a day-to-day basis. It would
Mm-hmm.
just seemed so I decided I would have 2 9-day sections, 2 more 9-day sections, and then the first 9 days they would all have their first few visits, and then the second 9 days they would perfect the ability to transform. And then I had a calendar and I was looking at it. One day I looked at it and it's interesting. And then I discovered that there were 63 days that summer, 7 nines. And I thought, holy crap, that's really cool. So in the book, I have 9 animals, 9 kids, and 7 9-day periods, which is 9 nines, which is kind of like takes it way up to a very high level for the number 9, at least. But a lot of this I didn't understand until I got very close. I would say probably the 9 thing about 6 years ago, 5 years ago.
Wow, wow.
I thought about this for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I had a whole bunch. I had four ideas back in 2008. I had just finished. I decided I would do the 4 easiest books that I had in my mind, and then I had these other guys,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been carrying them around ever since. I've got one book that I've been carrying around since 1981.
Wow.
I'm just not sure, because I got the idea. I have worked on it. I have a whole binder full of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but I just never felt the urge. And something happened in 2022, and I have a note here saying I made a New Year's resolution to do something about this, because I'd written parts. I'd written some of the biographies of the animals and the children, and I sent some to my granddaughters out in Alberta. I had very clear idea who they would be. Um, and then my little one was born. She lives in Germany, and so they each have their own animal. They know who I think they are,
Right.
and it's fairly. I think it's good. It was a good choice. They're kind of somewhat of a personality that
Mm-hmm.
agrees. But I did a lot of work on. Well, I'm going way off the base here.
No, that's okay, because I like, as someone who myself has had 2 or 3 book ideas that have been sitting with me, that, like, I'm not a writer. So
Yeah.
it's odd, I guess, in a way. Like, I write songs and I do other creative stuff, but I've had these few ideas in me, somewhat similar to your story, but in a much different way. So I
Mm.
was curious to talk to you about how you went from the idea. So you said you got this idea, you had it kind of marinating inside of you for a while, and then the first move for you was to develop the biographies of the characters.
Yeah, that was a kind of that's a pre thing, and I think
Hmm.
when I wrote the mystery that I wrote, the New Hamburg mystery, I did this much the same thing. I had to know the characters.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
My books are very character driven, so
Hmm.
I can't do anything. The plot's not that important, but I did notice in looking back on some of my notes that I was thinking about the plot, but I
Right.
didn't really know where it would go, because the characters push the plot
Right. I
eventually.
see. Okay. So the
And I had
character
to
development actually drives how it interacts and forms the storyline in itself.
to a certain extent, the
Hmm.
characters create what's going on. So
Right.
when
I
I was
see.
writing my mystery, I had this weird feeling that I had these people living in my head. I was just recording what
Right.
they were saying. And so sometimes the storyline could change just slightly because somebody in my head said, I'm going this way. And
Interesting.
so I have a general idea.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I wanted the kids to learn how to turn into an animal,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't think that's what you should do at the beginning. We needed to establish some kind of character in the children and find out
Right, I see.
where.
Yeah.
And then once they became animals, we needed to give them a challenge. So that's why I have three different parts.
Yeah, yeah. So the first one is the awakening, and the second, right? And then the
Yep,
second one is the becoming, and then
yep,
the third one is the Ennead, right?
yeah. So
Um,
that's
so how did you go about like the symbolism with the animals?
I did a fair bit of research,
Mm.
and then I had something here today. I had. Oh well, for instance, I had a dragon at one point,
Right, that didn't make it
and
to the story.
I just finally realized. Well, I mean, let's try to be real here.
Right, okay.
I love dragons, but it just didn't make sense that one of the animals wouldn't be real.
Right,
So
yeah,
it's just,
yeah.
right. So the the young girl who was going to be Ophi, actually, the blind boy, I had him down for Panther,
Mm.
and then I decided. I just thought a bat made more sense because it's blind, right?
Right, yeah, that does make, yeah.
And it doesn't matter. And he's the youngest kid. He and
Mm.
his brother are the two youngest. So he became the bat, and the Panther moved over to Eliza or EJ,
Mm-hmm.
and she was down for bat. So I just see that I switched them. And Leo was going to be a wolf, but then I realized that Charm, the dog, made better sense to have a wolf connection. So I moved Leo back to the beaver, and
Right.
that worked out well. And then Carrie was going to be the deer, and she ended up being the bear. And Lucy was going to be the dragon and the bear, and then she ended up being the deer.
Right. So the kids actually
So
had influence over which ones that they resonated with a
I
little
don't
bit.
know. I don't know.
Right.
I know that here's an example of my chart.
Right. Okay. Wow, that's
All
organized.
these
Yeah.
things, a power animal, natural gift, first gift, second gift, animal powers,
Mm.
the element that they're connected, like earth, wind, and
Yeah.
fire, and all
Yeah.
that, the partner that they would work with, and how they would communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of that stuff didn't make it to the story, but it was how I was trying to figure them out.
Right. Right.
Um, and and of course, I animals that I like too. Like I like the wolf as one of my favorites, but
Mm-hmm.
um, somehow my brain was able to work out a good balance because I think I've got a pretty good balance.
Right. Right.
I had 5 girls and 4 boys, so
Mm-hmm.
and I was wondering about the horse, but I think horse turned out to be a very good choice
Right.
because Will grew into that character,
Mm-hmm.
and I understood that it's all happens in your head, but realize that Will is a strong boy. He is the
Right.
biggest. He's the eldest of all the kids, and he's strong. He's a physical athlete.
And even the
And
name, right? Like Will.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that so I love that name because well, one of my sons had a good friend named Will. I just think Will is a cool name.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I had two or three Williams in my
Mm-hmm.
family background,
Mm-hmm.
but I just think Will's better.
Yeah.
And one of my other stories that I may write someday, the boy's name is William Allan,
Right. Okay.
but I don't. I think maybe I would call him Will. I just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
So
sure.
so you have the symbolism forming, and you have your characters developed, and so the story begins with them at the camp. And I saw that you actually had a map of the camp. How did you go about creating that map?
Well, I'm not going to tell you exactly. I'll just tell you this. Everything, my whole map exists in a real place.
Ah, I see. Okay. Okay. I was wondering
So I
about that.
took that real place and I made the big map.
Mm-hmm.
And in that real place, there's a campground. There actually is a campground
Mm-hmm.
there. And I just made it bigger.
Right.
And
I
then
see.
I decided how, thought about it, and I had to have campgrounds. And when my kids were young, we once went to a campground with a row of cottages down the side,
Mm-hmm.
bonfire place and water.
Right, right, yeah,
All those things are part of that
right.
creation of that scene.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what I just liked about, I remember sitting around the campfire and talking. And one of my old high school friends was there. She and her husband were there. It was
Mm-hmm.
really strange. It's out of the blue, after X number of years, you run into this person in a faraway camp up in Muskoka. So
Right, right.
that's part of that story. But they, I just created what I wanted to do. Like, there's no ice cream shack. I've never been to that camp. I've just looked at it Google.
Mm-hmm.
I decided I just made it suit me. Put an ice cream shack at the front. It has a beach,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very close to the native reserve. I'll tell you, it's at Cape Croker.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been there?
No, no, no. I haven't never heard of it.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
It's just to the east of Wyerton when you're
Mm-hmm.
going up Bruce
Okay,
Peninsula.
okay, yeah.
And if you go out from Wyerton and stay on the north side of that bay,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll go around. There's a big thing. Well, you can look at the map. You'll
Yeah,
see
yeah, yeah,
these,
yeah, yeah.
and that's where the native reserve is. And I camped there, and I had gone to powwow there,
Mm-hmm.
and I just love that place. It's
So
very
that's
beautiful.
that's where you did. Is that where you did your sweat lodge ceremony?
Oh,
Oh, okay,
I don't know where that happened. I can't remember.
okay.
I know it was somewhere east of Waterloo.
Right. Okay. Okay. Interesting. So, yeah, at that point, so you brought up this interesting topic of the fire, right? And
Hmm.
I think there's something kind of primal about sitting around a fire and talking, and there's a lot of symbolism there. But one thing that struck me in the story as you were telling it was the importance of the circle. And there was one quote where if we sit in a circle, we can see each other's faces, and that's
Hmm.
important for communication. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Um, when I started teaching, I started at Waterloo, Oxford in 1967, and I drove the janitor crazy because I couldn't stand seats in rows. And I tried to dream up other ways, but with 35 to 40 kids, I even built an amphitheater in
Oh,
my.
really? Yeah.
It used to drive him crazy for sweeping the floor.
Right.
I tried it for a while. It didn't work very well.
Hmm.
When I was at Conestoga Public School, I did rows for the first month till I got to know the kids. Then I would put them in pods of four.
Mm.
I tried to match them ability wise, and I encouraged them to talk when they were working on things. I had the noisiest classroom, no doubt about it.
Did you? Yeah.
I thought that was good, and then I left there and I went out to UBC to study adult education.
Hmm.
And one of the things I noticed that there were no classes with rows of seats.
Hmm.
Every classroom had a rectangle because it's very difficult to do a circle. It doesn't work very well
Hmm.
with desks. Everyone had a rectangle, which basically meant you could still see most everybody else's face.
Oh, I see. So like a rectangle around like a border, and then the teacher or the person speaking was in the middle.
Sometimes,
Oh, okay. Or at the front. Yeah.
when I was at Open Door, when I came back, then all my classroom was never anything but a square,
Hmm.
or sometimes a three-sided
Hmm.
with my desk at the front. Sometimes there would be people sitting beside me.
Right.
I always sat near the blackboard because I had to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I tried not to make it seem like I was the focus of the center of the room. So
Mm.
it just encourages. And when you can see, when you're not going to say something really stupid and ignorant to the face of a student, you might say it to the back of their head, and you
Mm.
might make funny faces and do stupid things. But if you're in a circle where everybody sees what everybody else is doing,
Hmm.
it calms everybody down. And I think they feel more respected. And I mean, the native people have known that forever.
Mm.
So, it's just a logical thing. I did a lot of, in the 90s, I was part of something called sacred circle dancing.
Right. Okay.
And that's a really powerful thing too,
Hmm.
because you see the faces of the people you're dancing with. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
No,
so that's,
I'm a big proponent of like I'm very interested in ritual and these aspects of rituals and just history and how what they knew comes out through what they did and the practices and rituals that they have, that we still don't fully understand all of the aspects and the power of that and the reasons why that all happens.
Yeah, and maybe we never will,
Mm.
because we're modern people with modern ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody who has sat in a circle, participated in a
Mm-hmm.
circle, knows what it's like.
Right.
And so I just knew that the best way to make the kids. So I was somewhat criticized at the beginning by a couple of people who said, "Your kids are just way too nice." That's,
Right.
but I realized that the way the grandparents treated them, it couldn't be anything but.
Right.
They're not going to be stupid. They're
Yeah.
going to be they're going to be respected. They say the words
Mm-hmm.
exactly the truth. The grandparents listen to them.
Yeah.
When they listen to them, the kids don't say stupid things. They have jokes, yes, and I like jokes, and humor is very important to me, and that's why I have the bear who doesn't want to be a vegetarian, but is trying to do that.
Right. That was a funny little interesting development there. Yeah.
Yeah, and that just happened. Like when you're dealing with personalities, at the beginning, I had to take out a piece of paper and I'd had to write down who spoke,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a big meeting. I wanted everybody to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually I didn't have to do that, because when the words came to my head, I knew who it was,
Right. I see.
and
Yeah.
I knew it would always balance out, because
Mm.
I was more balanced in my head.
Mm.
I somehow I had been able to achieve the respect that I had respect for each of my characters.
Right.
I don't think I had a favorite, but I tend to like stories where women have more power than they usually do.
Right.
So,
I see.
and I have three granddaughters, so
Right. So.
yeah, I have a different feeling about girls now.
Yeah, and I can just see as you're speaking to it, right? Like how much the characters mean to you. And especially that process of internalizing the characters. So at first it started with writing it down, but then over time you actually internalize these characters. And I guess that's where the dialogue aspect comes out, because they were actually dialoguing in your head
Yeah,
and you were just trying to kind of capture that almost as this thing was happening actually in your mind.
yeah. You can't control that conversation. There
Mm.
is no plan in any conversation I ever had. In any of the meetings, no plan.
Mm.
Um, and I didn't even know about the eagle until she showed up. Oh, that's cool, and it made sense.
Wow. So it was
So
very emergent in that way that you were writing it. It's like you were
yeah,
reading the story as you were writing it at the same time.
sort of. Yeah,
Interesting.
there's a quote in the book. I don't know if you saw it at the beginning, and I'm going to post something on my website tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Richard, excuse me, Richard Wagamies, who, by the way, I think is one of Canada's best writers ever.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a chance to read him, you really should.
Right, I'll check it out.
Don't just write what you know, write what you want to know.
Mm.
What you reveal to yourself, you reveal to the reader. Storytelling is about discovery.
Interesting.
I thought, yeah, that's cool, because that's exactly right. Um, because that's always what I've done.
Mm-hmm.
When I wrote the mystery, it was the same thing, same process. A whole lot fewer people in my brain.
Right.
And I didn't get close to someone like the villains. You don't get close to them.
Right.
But the other kids, I had to know intimately. I had to know somehow my fee would speak up,
Mm-hmm.
and I would know it's him, because he had a pattern. He had a style. Because he couldn't see, he could hear things that other people couldn't hear. Coyote is a trickster, so
Mm-hmm.
she's going to have more humor. Will is a big serious kind of guy, so he's going to be serious. MJ is a bossy owl. Carrie or Lucy the deer is a very sweet but brainy kid who has prodigious memory, which is maybe what I'm always thought I had.
Right.
Carrie's the little girl and who she just loved being a bear. That was just cool to be big.
Right.
And I like humor, so the bear is
Right, yeah.
And I believe I'm a trickster myself.
Right, yeah.
So if you weren't, I mean, if you were trying to create characters about which you knew nothing, I mean, that would be very difficult. So if you were writing a murder mystery about a serial murderer, that would be pretty tough. But you might estimate it. I was guessing. In many ways, I was guessing about what the beaver would say. But I think my beaver turns out okay. He's a kind of stay-at-home guy, and he's a well-grounded guy. And I think they all have their special qualities. Maybe not necessarily who I am, but who I might aspire to be.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
So there are the better parts of me. And I didn't want a lot of like silliness and squabbling and that kind of thing. So I guess I got lucky because the circle really does that for me. It removes that problem. The idea of respect. And it didn't occur to me to have it any other way. I just didn't know. I wrote the animal stories before I started writing the book. Those first animal stories, but the other ones came later, like when the kids met their animal thing. And when I wrote the day that Lucy went out, they went out for a walk, and Lucy was off by herself. I had no idea what was going to happen that day.
Right. Okay.
I didn't know. I might have known that there's going to be a problem, but I didn't really know that she was going to talk to the deer until deer showed up.
Right. I see.
When I got to that second part, I didn't know what to do. I was totally lost. I was wandering around for 2 or 3 days, and then I woke up at 4 a.m. one morning, and I knew exactly what it was. And I took papers into my bedroom. I lay on the bed, and I wrote it all down, and that was it. And the other part was easy, but that was the really hard part of the whole book. How do I change the structure without disrupting? And so that's when I brought the narrator in, because the narrator can speak to the reader. Now, one person who reviewed my book thought that was a silly thing. It's giving everything away, but it's not. It's preparing people for something. It doesn't have to be a shock every time something happens. Like if you hint at something, it's more exciting, really. And some of my readers have said, I can't wait to find out what's going to happen.
Right.
Because there are these little hints that are dropped here and there, or something's going to happen, or things are going to get picking up now. And I would probably never use that again, but it worked for the story. It was just
right. Yeah, there's a lot of little quotes that I picked up, and one, speaking of like the circle and this idea of empathy. There was a quote, I think it was something about empathy is about paying attention.
Yep. It requires that we care enough to try.
Yeah, that resonated a lot.
I think, first of all, I think it has to be part of who we are. Some people have no empathy. Egotists don't have empathy. And there are others who don't understand empathy. I don't think they're mean people. They just don't get it. They can't think about the bigger circle. Like for me, this was a story about expanding the circle, and we can't just be so selfish all the time. And sometimes we can learn from others, but life is about paying attention. Like so many things go whizzing by each day that you might miss. In fact, you do miss. That was one of the things about taxi driving. It slowed me right down.
Right.
Because the rhythm of the day was unpredictable. I did a lot of sitting sometimes. So I would be looking, and every morning when I started off, I would get that first call would take me somewhere, and everything else came from that first call. Because you're down at the end of Kitchener, and lo and behold, there's a call. And so that's how it happens. And I had one day, one of the most memorable days in other than the guy who got to take the guy to New York City, which is pretty excellent, $1,500 or something.
Wow.
I made a call, took somebody down to downtown Waterloo. I was on my way back to the fourth region, which is the north, like Conestoga Mall area. And I got a call. It was Saturday morning early. I'm the closest guy. Pick up something at this factory and take it to Sarnia. Oh, that's pretty cool. $211 or something, right? So I drive to Sarnia. There was nothing else to do. On the way back, I drop in to see my sister in London, have lunch with her, take my time. Coming back, I just get off the 401 on Homer Watson, or not Homer Watson, but further out. But anyway, there's a call for somebody at a car at one of the truck stops on the 401. A lady who had crashed her car.
Oh no.
And I had to take her to Shelburne. So that was my day. 3 calls and I made over $300. Mm-hmm. I took in over $300. Mm-hmm. I had 3 calls. It was all timing, right? And I had no control over that at all. Mm-hmm. None at all. It was pure chance. And you just really have to pay attention. And when you're a taxi driver, you really have to pay attention to where you are and what might happen. Mm-hmm. You have to be always ready. So I think paying attention in life is very important. Mm-hmm. If you don't pay attention to what other people are experiencing, you can't empathize with them. Empathy is, well, like Grandpa says, it's walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. Really, mm-hmm. that's a very old way of putting it, but it works. Imagination, that's the key. So I can look at you, but if I can't imagine what you're feeling, I can't be empathetic because I just have no idea. So, maybe the two things together. Actually, imagination is probably more important. But if you're not watching what's going on, you're not going to see that opportunity for empathy. Well, the other thing, of course, that helps with empathy is actually experiencing the world and knowing things differently. Like you can't just guide your life in a certain way. You have to be open to different things. When I went off to China, people would say, you're crazy. You're 58 years old. You're going to China. I didn't know one word, not one word of Mandarin. And I went because I just wanted to get away. I think I wanted to do something on my own. I'd always felt I couldn't do it on my own, and nobody ever wanted to do it with me. So here I am, and I have this chance. And I learned a lot about how you can communicate by paying attention. When you go to I'd go to buy groceries or at the market, I would stand back and watch people, see how much they paid. And, then I would know I'm not going to get cheated or whatever. And so I would do that. And I learned how to communicate very rudimentarily. And I learned how to solve problems. I remember I was I was flying to 2005. I flew back to visit a friend. I was in Beijing airport and I missed the flight because I miscalculated. And I'm wandering around and I finally find somebody who speaks enough English to help me. And I get on a later flight and everything works. So you just keep looking, keep trying, pay attention. Out in Budapest train station with my sons in 2000, we missed it. The train was going to pick us up in Budapest and take us to Frankfurt, where my plane was waiting for me, was late. And Jeff tried everything he could because he could speak German and they were just sitting there smoking cigarettes and I just started wandering around and I wandered way behind someplace and I saw a booth over here with some people lined up and I went, that lady spoke English and she solved the problem just by chance.
Interesting. Yeah.
One of the things that I always look for through my life was change. I chased change. I tried. I started out 2 years of teaching at Waterloo, Oxford, went back to do my master's, came out, worked for 5 years in Glenview. I was getting kind of bored teaching high school kids. They don't give a damn.
Mm-hmm.
And so I transferred to elementary school. And after 8 years there, I was tired of that. And I went to do my doctorate, and then I came back to Open Door. I could have stayed at Open Door, but they closed the school, so I took early retirement.
Kind of ironic. Open Door closed.
Yes. But, I was there for 13 years. I taught 23 different subjects.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
So, I always, like other people, wanted to teach the same thing year after year because you never have to do any work. But I was experienced enough by then that I didn't have to do a whole lot of work because I was teaching people how to think and how to observe and how all these things apply to your life. And teaching adults is good because they've already been screwed many times. They've had bad things happen, good things happen, and they're very open to the idea of beginning to analyze what's going on in your life. Yes, definitely. I saw change every chance I could get, and China was a change for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, like, this seeking change, do you still feel that now?
No. I except for different meals. I do the cooking.
Right.
I keep change at a very minimum. I no longer have the urge to travel. I've been to 30 countries. I think that's a pretty good number.
Yeah.
I don't want to go. I'm getting too old, and there's too risky with the COVID things, chances. And we're very happy living here. It's a very comfortable thing. If I'm going to change something, I'll change the book I read. I'll change the story I write.
Right.
Whatever my mood strikes me. Those essays that I have on that website are all from different times. And I've got a book down here about personal philosophy. I don't know what I'll do with it. I won't do anything probably. But when you write things out, that's really how you teach yourself what's going on. If you, I used to keep a diary. I kept a diary for 12 years, 15 years. And my eye doctor said to me a couple of years ago, why don't you go back and look at those things and, maybe you can write something about that. So I tried. It was so boring. It was horrible. And because I'm not that person. When I was looking into male things and others such ideas in the 90s, I was still in the world of spiritualism. But then I kind of moved a little more towards science later on after I retired. And then I started to see a different way of looking at the world. Now I'm trying to understand, what is this connection? Where does it come from? Why do we feel it?
So you're talking about connection. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So this idea of connection. So to you, how do you even frame that? That's not just with people, it's with
the universe.
Right. This feeling of connectedness.
Yeah, and I think the animals taught me that basically, because when I was writing, I don't know if they were talking to me or not, but it seemed to me that animals have the connection. And it's just natural for them. And I think we have it, but we don't pay attention. It's like the empathy observation thing. If you're in a forest and you really slow everything down, you might notice that you hear things or see things or smell things that are different. With your dog, I mean, that's a connection, right? There's something going on there. Annie with her cats, like they're, what do you call them anyway? They were 10 years old when we got them, and they hid under the bed for a month. And now Cynthia, the girl, she comes and sits on her chair when she's sitting. She won't sit on her, but she'll sit beside her. She will lie beside her on her bed, and she can pet her. So that's like making a connection. It's just what she did. How she she made an effort to connect with those two cats. I think it's one of those subconscious things because it really came out in the book when I was trying to understand animals.
Mm-hmm.
Then I began to see that there is something that they have that we have lost, that they just know who they are and where they are. Or as Panther said, I am Panther, I am Night.
Right.
She knows who she is, and she is her environment, and vice versa.
Yeah, I
We
like
don't
that.
get that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, living in a condo, we're very fortunate because out of our southern window, we have only trees all the way to the lake.
Mm-hmm.
Just so happens that the buildings are mostly houses and you can't see them because the trees are taller than the houses. So I can see Lake Ontario with almost no obstruction right from the window. So I feel like I'm living in the wilderness, really.
Right. Yeah, I just want to highlight that for a second because I think it's really important to draw out just that one thing of animals are their environment, right? Their environment and them are not a separate thing. Whereas I think oftentimes we feel as though we are separate from our environment.
And even worse, we believe that we can create our environment. And we do. We try to. The Age of Reason was the end of understanding nature because humans began to think they could understand everything, and that meant they could manipulate it, they could change it, they didn't have to follow any rules or laws of nature. And then the church, of course, didn't help much. And business, of course, doesn't respect nature. So we just lost that. I'm sure that Native people in the days gone by, not living on reserves, but in days gone by, that they understood how they fitted in because they didn't kill randomly or for entertainment. They'd killed what they needed and they gave thanks for what they needed. And I'm sure our ancestors, and one of the things I've really become aware of, because I was warned that I was dangerously shifting over toward taking over, making people believe that I somehow knew about Native people and things. And so I had to pull back and be very careful. But what I did realize is that you and I, we're all descendants of Native people from someplace, from the Pyrenees Mountains, from the Caucasus Mountains, from, northern Germany before modern history came. And so our ancestors lived the way we should, but we can't.
Yeah. And there was this very like generational connectedness, right? It's like you grew up where your parents grew up and then their parents grew up. And so that tree that you see on the way to the river or the way to this place existed in your family for multi-generations. And we don't have that anymore.
Can't even imagine that. I was so lucky. My first 19 years living on the farm. And other than going to college, the first 23 years I spent my summers on the farm. So, and I understood those. I was doing some background reading about our street in front of our house, which was the road and then cottages and then Lake Erie. And they used to call our place the place where the trees in the middle of the road. That was a location until they took the tree out. Right. So that's how we identified, by specific natural things. And then it was there for a long time. My dad even ran into it with his bike, because he knew it very well. We don't. I don't think we can get this back. I am not optimistic. My book is not. My book is about an ideal, but I really don't think we have any hope that we have, unless you want to withdraw, right, and go someplace and live in the woods, and maybe you can outlast a few people, but it's just not possible. And so many things have changed. We have too many people living on the earth. When our ancestors, prehistoric ancestors, lived, if you weren't strong enough, you died. You couldn't survive. Now everybody survives because we have medicine, we have extra food. Agricultural revolution, in my mind, kind of destroyed the whole thing. Everybody says that's a wonderful thing. We built civilization, but it meant that the biological function didn't work. It needs to work, and we can't evolve if we still have people, weak people. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be mean or anything.
Right.
But if there are people who just aren't strong enough, and evolve as a group, and we haven't evolved much in even 10 to 20,000 years. We haven't changed much at all.
Yeah. So on this theme of connection, when do you feel most connected?
Probably when I'm writing.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah.
I'm not a really good example of this because I think my connectedness was my childhood. And then after that, I was just maybe looking for it, trying to find it. But when you live in Beechwood in Waterloo, you go to the cottage, maybe you get a chance to be a little more connected if you're lucky and you can afford it. But once I left the farm, there was no connection for me. Anything, I don't think. I feel connected to people. And I felt very connected to Charm when she was alive. See, I have a little bit of a problem too, that I'm kind of a withdrawing kind of person.
Right, I see.
So I like talking to people, but I don't go out of my way to do that. I went to Waterloo on Friday and Monday to visit old friends from long ago. And it was very wonderful, but I had to drive there.
Right.
I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
I remember, going to a party and saying, "Oh, that was great fun." But before I went, I didn't want to go. I just wanted to stay home. I think I'm more of a hermit.
Right.
So I think connection is something that I'm trying to understand in my head. I don't think it matters if I'm out in the woods to be actually connected. I think if I understand that I am connected to the tree, to the rock, to everything, to other people, I think that's quite enough.
Yeah, for sure. So this connectedness is something that you simultaneously like, because I recognize in myself that connection is something that I simultaneously um, almost like not crave, but I want that, right? And I recognize how connectedness is so important, but then there's other times where I find myself withdrawing from it. So there's this tension between wanting it, but also withdrawing because sometimes it can be too much, right? Do you find the same dynamic?
Absolutely. One of the things I felt when I lived in China, and my son Tim had about the same time he was in South America doing his research. And I remember posting this on, because I used to send emails back to people telling them about my life, that I didn't have anything I had to do. And it was so wonderful. So absolutely wonderful. And I realized that one of the most binding things in life is friends. And in my life, I have found that friends demanded too much of me. If somebody wanted to see me, I had to go. Nobody came to see me. Maybe I wasn't very friendly. I don't know, but I always felt like it was a burden that I had to bear. And when I was in China, I didn't have to talk to anybody. I didn't have to do anything. I could go for a walk. I could get a sandwich. I could do anything I wanted. And Tim said the exact same thing. He said, I feel free. And but I do enjoy our conversations that I have with other people, as long as they're decent conversations that are worthwhile, that you're learning something, you're expanding something. But the effort, you have to make an effort. I told some friends the other day, what I realized after I quit teaching, that I was kind of like an actor with stage fright.
Hmm.
And I would, as my career went on, I would delay going to class. I would always delay going to class. And then once I walked through the door, I was another guy doing his thing. But I wasn't quite ready to do that because there were two of me. The guy who and I think you're talking about the same thing. There was the guy who stayed back there, and there was the other guy who thrived on the interaction.
Mm-hmm.
As teacher, you're the center of attention, like you're the star.
Right.
And you have responsibility to the children. So these are important things, but it is a big responsibility, and you have to do it no matter how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think I think it's quite possible that there could be two people living in you. Why not? There could be more.
Only two. I think I got probably at least half a dozen in here, maybe a dozen.
I think you should, because if you look at my essay, you'll see there are just those people, and we learn to deal with certain situations, but we can't push that other person away. That person's always going to be there. So my sick little boy at age 3 is there. My father's 6-year-old kid who was feeling deserted by his parents. We all have that kid living in us. Somebody who suffered a trauma of some kind. So yeah, I mean, it might be interesting just to try to make a list of your people and see who they are.
I've done a little bit of internal family systems work. So I'm somewhat familiar with the certain parts, and I've read, so Richard Schwartz has a great book, and it's actually called No Bad Parts. So it talks about that, and this idea of empathy that we're talking about, of having empathy towards others, of being able to take a perspective of someone else without judgment, also exists in an internal, right? Like there's internal self-empathy.
Yeah, understanding the characters. Yeah. You can't hate that person that's screwing up. You have to understand what he is going through, or she, if you're a woman.
Right.
That's a good point. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do have to empathize. It must be terrible if you can't.
Well, imagine and I mean, I really like this example, right? I love when people say, imagine if you talked to yourself the way, or like talk to somebody else the way you talk to yourself, right? Like, oh my God, you would be the worst friend ever. You would be the worst person to that person ever, right?
Or it could be the opposite. Like there are so many people who are really rough on other people and super kind to themselves, or maybe they're not. I don't know.
I do
Is it
wonder
possible?
about that. Yeah, like I wonder if it's just the way it seems. Like there seems like an overinflation to people who are critical of others, that maybe they're also critical of themselves. But I do wonder about that, because there's also narcissists, right? That have like zero empathetic, and but I do wonder deep down if there's like an avoidance of acknowledging their insecurities.
Highly likely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, you can look at your parents, look at your grandparents, and so on. You can see those patterns in people.
Mm-hmm.
But the trouble with grandparents is you're such a kid, you don't know anything.
Right.
You can't really analyze that, but you can think back. That my grandmother was really sweet to me, but she didn't like my mother, and they didn't get along until my grandma was very old. So, and that created kind of a tension that we didn't always understand. But yet they were as nice to me as possible. But I also realized that they were the ones who turned my dad into who he was. That's what happens, right? The thing is, when you get to be a grandparent, you don't have to worry about that day-to-day stuff.
Right.
You can be a much more laid back, kind of kind person. And maybe you also realize that you were wrong.
Right. Yeah,
Just
the
dead.
perspective of being older and wiser and seeing your mistakes.
Yeah. Robert, do you ever read any Robert Bly? Is he still popular these days?
I'm not aware of him, no, but go ahead.
He was big in the 90s, men's movement. And I remember one quote I saw him talking. Very interesting. You could probably find him on YouTube. He said, the reason why the grandson and the grandfather are so close is that they both understand that what the father thinks is important isn't.
Hmm.
And I thought that's really right about it. The old guy realizes all those years of trudging along, career and everything, and
Hmm.
trying to keep track of everything. I was doing the wrong thing. Should have been paying more time with my kids or
Hmm.
doing that kind of thing. And I thought that was very interesting because that's
Hmm.
how I felt with my granddad.
Right.
I
Right.
didn't understand my dad. I didn't like being around my dad that much. So,
Hmm.
and I'm sure lots of other people have found the same thing. And he probably didn't understand me.
Right. Right.
It was better. After supper, I would walk across the field and listen to baseball with my grandfather. It was much
Hmm.
simpler.
Right. Yeah, I know my grandfather, like my relationship with my dad, we're really close, right? I
Yeah, you guys,
appreciate that we're able to talk about a lot of stuff, and I think we have a good relationship. But I know with my grandpa that he was very kind of closed off to emotion, closed off to discussion and affection and all that kind of stuff, right?
your dad's father.
Yeah, yeah. So there was an element to that that was kind of hardened to that.
They were an interesting couple because
Oh, you remember them?
oh hell yes,
Yeah.
I knew your grandma very well.
Right.
For whatever she worked at Winterburn School, didn't she?
Mm-hmm.
She was the
Yeah.
secretary. Yeah, so I got to see her a lot, and I talked to your grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
Your dad, one summer I hired him to do some gardening work for me.
Yeah, he mentioned
I
that.
was out there, and so I got to talk to your granddad. He was a big guy. I mean, he
Yeah.
was a little frightening, but he was. I didn't see anything particularly dangerous about him, but I can understand that's very common
Hmm.
among that generation to
Yeah, it
be
definitely wasn't dangerous. Yeah, it wasn't in any sort of aggressive
just
way. It was
stay
just more of a
withhold.
withdrawn. Yeah.
Yeah, my granddad was a very nice guy, um, and he was somewhat reserved. It was kind of funny because he would never laugh out loud, but he would just almost bust his gut, holding it in.
Right,
He had
right.
a good sense of humor,
Yeah.
but he didn't show emotions
Hmm.
at all. But he was very kind to me, and so he did. He helped me, and that's his way, I
Hmm.
guess, of being loving and caring.
Right.
Um, you don't really need to go out of your way to show stuff. You just need to be supportive.
Hmm. Right.
And that's the other thing about this paying attention. Grandparents pay attention to the kids too. Charm, tracks them.
Hmm.
So it's like everybody's important in the group.
Hmm.
That other thing about leadership, I didn't really hit me until I started writing about it. But I realized that our leadership model is really wrong. And I was a department head, so I know, and I also had principals that I worked for. Our things all was all mixed up. Like we need shared leadership, and the kids were very good at that because when certain situation arose, the one who was needed stepped forward and took responsibility.
Hmm.
Uh, that's how leadership should be,
Hmm.
and that kind of leadership will get us into a much more connected place with the environment. And we have top down leadership. Those guys up there, they're not thinking. Like I said to Annie today, I'll bet you that those people who have shares in Loblaws, where they're just going through the roof, are still complaining to their friends about the cost of groceries.
Right. Right. Yeah.
They just don't make the connection there.
Hmm.
They think they're the only ones, and
Hmm.
they just aren't paying attention to the big picture. So
Yeah, I think this is like a perfect opportunity for me. So like my logo actually is a brain, right? It's the
right,
hemispheres, and then
uh,
with a light bulb in the middle.
yeah,
And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Ian McGilchrist.
no,
So he did a lot of research into the hemispheres of the brain and the different ways that they pay attention. So there's a rumor or like a myth that okay, one does one thing. There's the logical, and then there's the creative.
left, right,
Yeah, and it's not quite that, right? If you listen to his stuff, it's really fascinating because he says that they both problem solve, they both are creative, they both do stuff, but they do it in different ways. And the difference is the way that they pay attention. So that left brain is very boundaried and closed off and kind of small detail oriented paying attention. And the right brain is very deals with holes and it pays attention to the way that things fit together. So what it sounds like we're kind of on theme is this left brain dominance of being focused on certain problem solving things without thinking about the bigger picture, without thinking about relationships, without thinking about yeah, does that resonate with you at all?
Um, when I was listening to you, I was thinking, I try very hard to be both,
Mm-hmm.
but I was visiting with a friend John Hume the other day, and John made it up to being invited to be the big boss of Waterloo, and then he quit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he and I worked together for years. We were on curriculum committees and so on. We did a lot of projects together and that thing. And I noticed, and we were talking the other day about stuff that we're reading.
Mm-hmm.
And John is that guy that's looking at the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm much more specific. It's like I've been doing my reading on evolution and
Mm-hmm.
how these things happen.
Right, right.
He's looking at it going back, like he will start at the top and work down, and I will
Mm-hmm.
start at the bottom and work up. I guess we were a good team.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very organized and I'm pretty logical,
Mm-hmm.
but I often use intuition.
Right, right.
I'm not a type A.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm I, so I'm not very rigid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I like the idea that both sides of the brain. I think people misunderstood, as you say,
Mm-hmm.
that it was it was just one side doing this.
Right.
And I'm both. I'm an artist to a certain extent. I've
Mm-hmm.
written poetry, and I've tried to play music, although I'm terrible at it.
Right.
And I did photography, for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
So I have an artistic side to me. And of course, this is art, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, wrote a doctoral dissertation, and
Mm.
that's far from fiction.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and actually, I think doing that helped me a lot to
Mm-hmm.
become a better writer because I don't waste a lot of words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's
I
important.
have to be very specific. And also because I write mostly dialogue, I
Mm-hmm.
think I save a lot of words. I don't
Right.
believe in descriptions. In the book, Lucy backs up against a tree and rubs her back
Right.
to describe what tree it was.
Right.
Everybody,
Right.
you
Right.
know, let the imagination of the reader
Mm-hmm.
fill in that space.
Yeah.
So some people, but I think I was talking about sort of ordinary things that
Mm.
most Ontarians have experienced. So.
Yeah. Well, because like that idea, I think it actually, that theme works out and checks out in your book. So see how this fits into your, I guess, structure of the book. Because what I saw with this hemispheres, so what I kind of saw is almost like this starting out in this left hemisphere and the animals representing the right hemisphere, right? So there's this connectedness, this holes, they understand the bigger picture. So there's this movement away from the science and the scientific into the nature and connectedness, which to me represents this move from the left brain to the right brain. And I was kind of getting concerned about that because I didn't want to poo poo or neglect that left side. So I was wondering how this was going to play out. But I did make it through majority of the book. I think the whole thing. I skipped through a little bit of the end to get there. But you said something really important was they were able to maintain their other side of themselves, the logical side of themselves, when being an animal.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting, given what you said,
Hmm.
because I was thinking of it very that when they were beginning, if they let their mind wander into human, they could have an accident or
Hmm.
something could
Right.
happen. Yeah, I never thought of that. So you're thinking of the animals as being now. Is right brain creative?
It's more it's not necessarily that they have certain defined roles. It's just how they pay attention that's different. So in the animals, right? They're connected. They're smelling.
They're not focusing on paying attention. They just do it. They
Right,
are. They
right.
just are paying attention because
Yeah.
it's.
And I like that you said, because so Ian McGilchrist's book is called The Master and His Emissary. So basically, the left brain is not supposed to be the leader, right? It's a good tool. It deals with tools, hammers and nails, and it's very tool oriented, and it is a tool, but it's the right brain that should be in charge because it knows better how to pay attention to how it should solution and how it should use that left brain. And I liked what you did with the animals because it's like, well, once we've fully transformed into our animal selves, then we could therefore use our human mind and our logic again, but in a much more impactful and effective way.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. Well, and I honestly hadn't thought of that. That just seemed like a logical thing to me.
Right, yeah, right,
You
right.
know, I didn't know that, but it makes sense when you say it. Um, I was just trying to intuit what was going on. Like so many of the things. There were times when I had to look something up,
Mm-hmm.
but mostly I didn't. Most of my research was done before I wrote the story.
Right,
But occasionally I would run into a problem, like the beaver taking Leo down under the water.
right, right, yeah.
I had to look that up and see, how can he do that? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how does I didn't know they had this extra eyelid or whatever it is that they can see through that
Right,
protects their eyes from underwater. So, but mostly I just, what if I'm an eagle? What do I feel?
right.
I think that's important because they are going back and forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I like the eagles, the animals to me. Um, I wanted them to speak wisely. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want them, like I said one time, I was going for Aesop, not Disney.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Wise animals with a nice language, kind of
Mm-hmm.
grown up language.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about the concept of thought communication?
It makes for some interesting like possibilities, right? Because then when they're so we don't want to spoil this either if people are going to read it, but towards the end there's some conflict where they actually have to kind of do some planning and
Mm,
strategizing and stuff, and they're actually present in these different scenes where they're communicating with each other. Well, they can't really tell the people that they are communicating, right? So it allowed
uh,
that to happen in a way
yeah,
that
yeah. Yeah. That's good because I remember I read one some theory a few years ago that the difference between how women relate socially
Mm-hmm.
is that women typically would gather around the fire. I mean, we're going to prehistoric times,
Mm-hmm.
and they would be used to face discussion. They'd be
Mm-hmm.
doing their work, sitting around a safe place. The men went out hunting in a line. There was no talking.
Mm-hmm.
There had to be signals. They had to be comfortable working side by side,
Right, right.
be able to communicate.
Yeah.
And this kind of like it's kind of like that because they had this secret communication going on.
Mm-hmm.
Those other guys just weren't aware of it at all. But if they'd been cackling and hackling and roaring and so on around, somebody would have got the message that there was something wrong there.
Right,
So,
right. Because so they were kind of. I like that there was something that they kind of dropped into where I don't know whether it's above or below, but they kind of either dropped into it or raised above it, and then they were kind of existing in this realm where they could kind of communicate, and then there was this lower kind of more dense version of this corporate greed and the corporate, and so that really symbolized come out, and so these dynamics played off each other.
that's an interesting look at it. Yeah, yeah,
Was that
yeah.
intentional? That wasn't intentional?
Maybe
I guess
I
to
like,
who?
but the important thing is I wanted the animals to. Um, I wanted them to be able to communicate in a special way.
Mm-hmm.
Quite frankly, I didn't think about I didn't consciously think about
Mm-hmm.
the fact that they were observing these bad guys and communicating, and the bad guys couldn't hear it. I
Mm-hmm.
just knew they couldn't hear it, so it didn't strike me. But
Right.
as the reader, you look at that and you say, "Oh, I see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just kind of a natural thing. Like if you're going to talk in your mind, clearly they can't hear you.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I planned that.
Mm.
You know, a whole lot of stuff happened just serendipitously. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I just felt like moving that way or this way.
Mm-hmm.
And when I decided they were going to speak that way, that kind of sets the tone for the whole thing.
Right, right.
Like, when they were hiding under the patio, under the deck,
Mm-hmm.
trying to get the information from the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And, the raven was sitting on the bird thing, and she stole the
Yeah.
cross from the guy. But all these animals are listening to these
Mm-hmm.
guys talk. They have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
They can do both. They can do normal communication.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not sure about the birds, the animals, but the animals who were there were all kids crossing over, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and by that time it had become apparent that they could do both.
Yeah, yeah.
Be, go ahead.
Well, and I like that. Yeah, like that. It's like a symbol for ignorance too, right? So these people who are just, oh, I'm just doing business and trying to do this stuff. It's like there's an element of ignorance in that that's just symbolized as ignorance itself, right?
And selfishness and
Yeah, and
all.
self-centeredness and just focused on so narrow-minded, right?
When I think that's exactly the situation, because
Mm-hmm.
what I was trying to do was to look at making a connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose, I had to have an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And the logical thing was the enemy would have to be the opposite. So I
Right.
didn't give it a lot of thought,
Mm.
but it made perfect sense. Like I tried, I had a few lists of a few things, but the bad guys at the reserve, that was always my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Poachers and other people, the garbage guys, they were just building up to the big story. So I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I clearly wanted to go little steps at a time until
Yeah.
they were ready to take on these big
Right.
bad guys.
Right.
And I wanted the story to be simple.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want any weapons. I didn't want any killing. I didn't want
Right. Right.
violence.
Yeah.
I liked the fact that the animals could outsmart the
Mm-hmm.
humans, trick them,
Mm-hmm.
and find the traps and trip the traps. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was kind of cool. So it's just what you would do, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I became the animal. And I think what I wanted to do in the book was to just talk about the things about goodness that I've learned, and some very basic ones: the circle and listening to other people.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, I think that's what my contribution is. I don't know if people will do it.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Highly, highly unlikely, but
Mm-hmm.
it certainly was one of my goals in
Mm-hmm.
all through my career. How can I relate to the kids and get them to feel the respect that they deserve? Because when they feel respect, they will start thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and they will say, oh, well, maybe what I think is worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can begin to carry that a little bit further and get some self-respect.
Yeah. It
Don't
seems to me like you were a kind of a gardener planting seeds in these people to hopefully one day be watered and to grow.
That's the farm boy in me.
Right. Right. So that carries through.
Yeah, I guess it's I mean, I certainly don't regret that. I was so fortunate to live in that idyllic time, even though I was sick as a little kid, to live in that idyllic time when we didn't have computers and all the other stuff that we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so fortunate to, start teaching when they started to reform education. Mind you, it never takes hold because the people who run it will never let it be what it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Education is still a crap mess
Mm-hmm.
in our country and maybe all over the world, because people are trying to tell other people what to do to
For
control
sure.
their lives.
Yeah.
Education is not about freedom,
Mm-hmm.
but conformity. That's it.
Yeah.
If you're lucky enough to break away from that, and you have to do it yourself,
Mm-hmm.
then you'll be okay. But the ones who don't, who get it, who buy into that whole system,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be tough for them.
Well, I think it's hard to rely on that system wholly, and I think you do your best you can to, like, it's hard to reject a culture that you're in too. It's hard not to be a part of that without leaving, right? It's hard to reject it from the inside out. And I think it's really tough. But I think if you can supplement with a lot of other learning, right? I think that's the best you can do is try and supplement what you can, and you know.
You just try to find a way, and I mean, one of the ways you find out if something's wrong is by doing it.
Mm,
So that's not always a bad thing.
right,
And
right.
I always felt, I mean, one of my essays said, you never learn much from being happy. You really learn because you get lazy, right? I'm
Right.
happy. I don't have to do anything. Then you don't do anything, and pretty soon you're in another bad place. So
Interesting.
our best teachers are our pain,
Right.
things that go wrong in our lives. If you can make it through that,
Mm.
you have to really want to. Um, I'm a big fan of a guy named Krishnamurti. I don't know if you've
Yeah, I
ever.
read Krishnamurti. Yeah.
Well, I like his "Truth is a Pathless Land." I love that
Mm,
quote
right.
because
The
it
true
just,
truth is a pathless land.
yeah, it it gives me freedom
Hmm.
that I don't have to follow somebody else. That I will find my own way to truth. And I don't think it matters. Like they talk a bit in the book about, is that a truth? What is truth? What I'm not sure if there are things like universal truths,
Hmm.
except survive, bring new life, and keep the balance. Those are universal truths because if they don't happen, it's done.
Hmm.
To me, that's like the ultimate truth.
Hmm.
These things break down, we cease to exist.
Right, right.
So that's how I judge truth.
Yeah, because it's such a what a is there a bigger question, right? Of what is truth? And to me, I'm just reminded of, like, I don't know if you know, but like the transcendentals, right? Truth, goodness, and beauty,
Yeah.
and how those tie in together. And truth being, yeah, like what does it mean for something to be true? I'm not sure if there's universal truths either.
I
So
mean,
go ahead.
one would think that not killing is a universal truth, but sometimes it happens. And I think if we focused on the others, we wouldn't have to worry about not killing.
Mm,
Part of our problem is that we don't know the key things that, and I think my three things are pretty key.
hmm.
If we follow those, we wouldn't be killing people. We wouldn't be doing any of that
Hmm.
stuff. We would just be doing what we should do.
Right, because it was what, to survive, to
Bring new life
bring new life,
and to maintain
and
balance.
to maintain balance. Yeah, that third one's that's hard to do.
Well, yeah, not hard for animals. It's hard for us
Hmm.
because we have the ability. David Suzuki said, and I think I quoted David in the book,
Hmm.
only humans have the ability to take it all. That was one quote from one of his shows 30 years ago.
Hmm.
You know, did I tell you that I have a letter from David Suzuki?
I heard that. I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I could find it too easily.
Hmm.
I'll I was going to I could I can photocopy it.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a very short handwritten letter. He
Hmm.
doesn't do email,
Right.
and so you know I was quite thrilled to get it back, and then you know I sent them a PDF, and he said he was going to have his grandson read it, but I think he's probably too busy. So
Right. Right.
that would sure be a hell of a thing
That's a pretty
to
cool
have.
moment, though, to get that back.
To me, it
Yeah.
is, you know, and not to be charged to use all those quotes. He was just giving them to me. Wagame's his whatever, he's dead now. So
Hmm.
they said, "Oh, you're just using it that one quote, then you can have it for free, but otherwise you have to pay."
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that. Yeah, interesting.
So you know, I was just trying to get. So with David Suzuki, I made sure that he understood how they were going to be used, and
Hmm.
I sent him, you know, a little context around it, and he was happy. I think
Hmm.
his assistant, secretarial assistant, or whatever she's called, administrative assistant,
Hmm.
said he was very pleased with it. So the important thing here, and I've learned this over the last few years, do not ever be afraid to reach out, to talk to even famous people. I'm a big fan of a guy named Martin O'Brien, he writes mysteries set in south of France. And I love those books because the characters are, they have their way of doing things. And he made a reference to some music by a certain person. And I was keen. I wanted to listen to it. I looked up, didn't exist. He had it mixed up. So I sent him an email. 3 weeks later, I get 2 free books sent from England, saying good eye. And he thanked me for doing that. And there's another fellow, Harry Bingham, who's a writer, a British writer. I've communicated with him. Iona Wishaw, who's a writer from BC. They do like to talk to you. I've only run into one guy who didn't want. He was just rude. But mostly they're kind. They're humble. And so you should always do that. Reach out. Don't be afraid. Never know what's going to happen. I mean, I did the Suzuki thing because what did I have to lose? So I took a chance, and it was very good result. I'm pretty happy with that. So.
Yeah, that ties in well to the theme of my podcast, because the very first episode was titled "Great Things Happen When You Put Yourself Out There."
Exactly.
So it's exactly about that, right? Of just kind of throwing it out into the wind and just seeing what comes back, right? You never know how the universe is going to speak to you back.
And I think about that a lot because I've done the family history thing, and I have many stories of ancestors who were just on the edge, like fought in a war, didn't get killed. A great grandmother was separated from her husband, and they were shipped from Kentucky up the river to Detroit. And he got there. She didn't come up for 2 years. He didn't know at the time of separation that she was pregnant. She had the baby. The baby got killed in a canoe accident. And she finally made it. He waited for 2 years on Hog Island. And they got together and they had 12 more kids. And he became one of the main founders of the town of Kingsville. So
wow.
What can, and he had fought one battle in the American Civil War, was immediately in prison camp till he broke out. So, those things. I had and one of his ancestors didn't get the plague, and he survived, and he buried people who had the plague. But if he had got the plague, I don't exist. His son doesn't exist. You think about your past. Go back. So many chances. A guy falls in love with a girl, they break up. You don't exist. But they don't break up. So there you are. You have a better chance, and eventually it works its way down to you. And that's really a very cool thing, because it shows you that it's a very complicated story. Nobody's in charge of that. That's
right.
The way it happens.
Yeah, there's like an unfolding. Because to me, even the way I think about it sometimes, right, you can look at something so simple like a pen, right? For a pen to exist, how many things before it had to have existed, right? I mean, literacy had to be born, right? And then for literacy to be born, it's like humans had to evolve to a place that they could communicate and speak and then develop this whole process, all so that a pen sitting right in front of you actually could exist. And I think that goes back to William Blake's seeing the universe in a grain of sand, and seeing how everything, all of existence, ties up into every single thing, has that whole string of history behind it to exist.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I tend to think about from a human point of view, but you're right. You're right. Our ideas, our evolution has led to the creation and evolution of tools and tons of things that become. I just read a book about the theory about how language got started, and very interesting.
Which
there are
book
different.
Was that?
Bickerton's. It's called Adam's Tongue. He has a very unpopular point of view,
right.
but very interesting. I think it's legit. Um, and his basically goes back to when people started to um, look for larger animals for larger food supply. What I didn't realize is that very early on, humans just followed animals around till they died.
Right.
And they ate them. Then eventually they learned how to hunt. But in that process of hunting, you have to be able to communicate. And that's his idea that was one of the beginning points where they had to have words so they could do the job more efficiently.
Right. I see. Yeah.
Reminds me that we are connected and that we're just looking to find out what that means.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe it is maybe I get a message. Maybe I get um, maybe I get a feeling.
No, I think there's something there to that connection. So, I guess I wanted to check in. How are you doing right now for time? How are you for?
I'm fine. Fine. I have a meeting tomorrow at 11, but I'm not. I'm feeling good. I don't get to talk very often, so you have other thoughts we could explore too.
No, I think I'm kind of feeling it wrap up a little bit. I'm just going to double check
Yeah,
if there was anything else that I had, but I think we covered an incredible amount.
a lot.
So I guess my last comment or request would be like, do you have anything last message that you'd like to kind of share with anybody?
Well, I think what I became aware of as I was getting deeper into the story was that I was no longer writing a purely juvenile fiction fantasy. It became apparent that I was writing a story for all ages, but I sometimes call it a children's book for adults. I think probably my best audience would be adults. And kids today are into all kinds of weird and wonderful fantasy characters. I think my book is something that older people can relate to because they may have memories of that. And it would also be a way of thinking about how are you doing, how are you dealing with your grandchildren? How are you dealing with your children? Are you giving them the respect they need? Because they are a problem sometimes. They're difficult, and they're a being trying to become a being. And do we listen to them enough? Do we listen to anybody enough? That I think that's important. Um, and I think people, from my experience so far, most my senior readers have really liked the book, and they get involved with it, and I think it's because they can relate to it, because of the grandparents, because of the children, um, and maybe the animals. I don't know. A lot of people have been asking me, how do you find out about your totem animal and all this stuff? So, it's so obvious. I mean, you just have to Google it, but nobody ever thought of it.
Right.
Like I had the luck of being on the powwow committee and having some really good experiences with Native people and going to powwows and my son today, he said he has a company out in Alberta. He and his partner, they deal with negotiating for Métis people, and now they're expanding to Native people. And he said, I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for you telling me about these things. So it just hit me at the right time. I don't think this is a book about Native people. This is a book about a person trying to understand the good things that Native people teach, and the good things that animals can teach us. That's what the story's about. Really. So
that's a great message. And again, the book is The Summer of the Ennead.
Ennead.
Ennead. And so there's the book right there. I don't know if it'll show up in the video, but Roger, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me today. I think we had a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. And it's very stimulating. And if you ever need any other stuff, just let me know.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think we'll definitely talk again for sure.
We'll talk some other topic. I've got a few other ideas. I've got a murder mystery I'm working on, and the dark side. So I'm not sure if I'm.
So that'll be round two. We'll have to have you on again to talk about that. And
We'll talk about
once again, thank you, Roger, so much. And I really enjoyed the book. So
Good. Thanks. appreciate your patience with the technology too.
Oh, for sure, for sure. So again, thank you, and we'll be in touch. We'll talk soon.
Yep.
But thank
Yep.
you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Been a pleasure.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
bye.